famous battles is the British Crusader I. This medium tank or cruiser was developed from the original Christie cruiser and was deployed in the Western Desert throughout 1941 and 1942. Its 27 miles per hour top speed made it 5 miles per hour faster than the Germans' medium tank, the Panzerkampfwagen 4A, and its 40mm armor was twice as thick, but it was greatly disadvantaged in firepower. Its 40mm gun was no match for the Germans' powerful 75mm cannon, and superior speed and armor just didn't make up for this deficiency. Like its German rival, it was equipped with 2 machine guns and handled by a crew of 5. The Crusader's 131 horsepower power plant was also not quite powerful enough to drive this 18.5-ton tank with any degree of reliability. Though some people might believe that a graceful-looking machine is a good one, under these premises, the Crusader should have been the best tank of all times. It looked and sounded the epitome of power and pace when travelling at speed, with a cloud of dust pouring out behind it, but sadly it had more style than substance. The Crusader had been forced through production and went into action before all its defects had been ironed out, and more were lost to mechanical failure than through enemy action. That it still made an impact on the battlefield was more due to the dedicated work of the tank crews than to the quality of this medium tank. The heavier British tank, the Matilda II, weighing in at 26 tons and known as the Queen of the Desert, had been extremely successful during 1940 and 1941. Its 80mm armor would stand up to most anti-tank guns at that time, but when the enemy introduced more powerful guns in 1942, this comparatively slow tank, top speed 15 miles per hour, quickly became a liability. To make matters worse, its own 40mm gun couldn't penetrate the new and stronger enemy armor, in addition to which the iron cast construction couldn't be up-armored, and neither was it possible to increase the size of the turret so it could carry a bigger gun. So, the Matilda didn't stand the test of longevity, though it was still in early 1942 an important ingredient in the 8th Army's arsenal. The first American-built tank to see action in Europe and Africa was the 29 tons medium M3A5, or the Grant as the British called it. A large number of this reliable tank, powered to a top speed of 25 miles per hour by a 400 horsepower engine, were loaned to the British forces in North Africa and performed well as both its 57mm armor and 75mm gun could match the German Panzerkampfwagen 4. The Grant was furthermore armed with a 37mm gun and no less than 4 machine guns. However, its rather ungainly layout did result in some tactical disadvantages, as the main gun was mounted low. The Grant had to expose a substantial part of its bulk before it could open fire. It wasn't that the Americans were particularly fond of this design, but their industry was in 1941 incapable of producing the casting that would enable them to mount the 75mm gun in the turret. The main German battle tank in 1942 was the Panzerkampfwagen 4A, better known as the Mark 4A, rather an enigma. Its 75mm gun was quite powerful, but of low velocity, and it had rather thin, only 20mm armor, and its 22 miles per hour top speed can only be considered average, so on paper, the Mark IV didn't have any significant advantage over most of its rivals. However, it matched all comers up to early 1942 by its combination of firepower, protection and mobility, which was exploited to the full by extremely well-trained crews. Though the Germans had other tanks, like the Mark III, self-propelled artillery and a variety of armoured vehicles at their disposal in North Africa, the Panzerkampfwagen 4 was the main AFV until the Tiger was introduced later in 1942 during the Battle for Tunisia. There is ample time on both sides to discuss and plan strategies, though the need for this is probably greater on the British side, as the Germans' blitzkrieg tactics in general, and Rommel's special talents in particular, appear quite capable of doing the job. As could be expected, Rommel makes the first move. In June, his panzers are yet again bearing down on the British 8th Army, supported by the inevitable Stukas. The Desert Fox's first objective is Tobruk. It still bothers him that he hadn't been able to dislodge the Allied forces from the fortress in 1941.